You're good to go.
Today we have the privilege of meeting with Frank Wright. Frank is an established artist and professor at the George Washington University. As a sixth-generation DC native, Frank has lived virtually his entire life in the nation's capital, witnessing nearly a century of monumental points in American history. He recalls where he was the day Pearl Harbor was attacked, how everything changed following the war, and was in DC during the Civil Rights Movement. As an artist, DC is not just his home, but his gallery, with many of his paintings documenting these historical moments displayed all over the city. So good afternoon, Frank. Thanks for joining us today.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Delighted that you're here.
Well, I'm glad. You have a love of Civil War history in particular. You even have a sizable collection of artifacts, such as diaries and newspapers. So did you see the movie Lincoln?
Yes, I did.
Yes.
I didn't see it immediately, but then I did see it because it, my goodness, it has so many kudos that I rather was curious what it would be like. But you know, there's this big re-interest in the Civil War, and my goodness, people are publishing left and right about Lincoln and that area. So therefore, I have been reading a lot of books about him too.
That's great. So speaking of history, as a sixth-generation DC native, you've seen your home city, the nation's capital, transform over nearly a century of history. If you could write your own movie...
Now wait a minute, I'm not a century old.
Well, nearly a century.
No, not even nearly.
Not even nearly. A little over half a century. If you could write your own movie about the city's story, where would it begin?
Well, I guess it would begin when I was a child. You know, Mickey Mouse and I are the same age because Mickey was so-called born in 1931 or 32, and I was born in 1932. So I grew up drawing Mickey and Minnie and all the other characters. You know, there were a lot more characters there. Donald Duck, of course, but then there was Clarabelle Cluck and Horace Horsecollar, and I drew them all. The thing is, at that time, my family was very curious about my interest in drawing, and so I would sit down at the kitchen table, and I would draw all these things. And then my mother became fascinated that I liked all of this stuff. But I did, and what I could do that a lot of people couldn't do was draw the bill of Donald Duck in foreshortening, because you know that's hard. Because anyway, ducks don't look like Donald Duck in the first place, but I could do that in foreshortening, and that was kind of neat. And that was a sort of a key to popularity that I could, you know, draw, because I didn't have much athletic prowess at all. I tried. I was on the 14 and under team and the 17 and under team, but I wasn't much of an athlete. But they forgave me for that because I could draw all of this stuff, and then I also could draw warplanes, because 1941 was the beginning of the war. Basically, you know, a day that would exist in infamy, which was December the 7th, 1941. And I was 9 years old, and I remember it very, very well. But actually, I was a child of the Depression, because I was born in 1932 at the height of the Depression. And then I lived in far, far northeast Washington all of my childhood. You see, we were talking a little while ago about the hobos and so on coming off the railroad. Well, the far northeast corner is where the railroads go through. It's now Amtrak, but at that time it was the Pennsylvania Railroad, which was electric, and then the steam railroad, which was the B&O. And all those tracks went right within a block of my house. And I played on the trains all my life. But in those days, you know, there were hobos, what we call hobos, coming off of the train. And the hobos were not dangerous people. They were people who were out of work and didn't know where to go, or they left their families for a while. Some didn't come back because they were just sort of humiliated by it. But hobos were not derelicts. They were people who, when they would stop in my little town, they always didn't want a handout. They wanted work. They said, "Do you have?" Said to my mother, "Do you have any work for us, ma'am?" They came to the back door too, by the way. But my mother wasn't the slightest bit intimidated by them, nor were we all. The word hobo really means people who are down on their luck. And well, when they got off the trains, they would when the trains would slow down, they'd get off, and they would come through the neighborhood. And my horse chestnut tree in our front yard was marked, meaning that the hobo was telling other hobos that they could get a meal or something there, you see. And my mother always had a special plate for the hobos to eat in, and she would fix them a nice little bit of food. And what they would really do is to pick the cinders, the unburnt cinders from the kitchen stove, and they pick through those cinders or something, or do something in the garden, and that's what.
So there was nearly no crime during this time in the city. You had these hobos come right to your front yard.
You want to know something? No, there wasn't. There wasn't. We had. I used to walk up the tracks all the time, you know, with my buddies, and we saw a lot of people of other ethnic groups, but we never had the slightest bit of problem with them. Because whatever crime there was at that time was crime within their groups, and not between so-called black and white, not at all. And I like to correct that impression that people think that there was that type of thing. There never was. We, socialized and so forth as much as we wanted, and one of the guys that I would see all the time, I was on the tracks all the time, but one of the guys I saw, his name was Frog Legs, because evidently he had rickets or something as a child. And we all knew Frog Legs, and we would talk to him and everything. When we got back into the town, I didn't see him, but he lived in a place called Deanwood, which was adjacent to where I was. Anyway, it was very, very nice.
And so how did things change after the attack on Pearl Harbor from that?
What happened was, the Depression, when there's a Depression, it means everybody has a problem going in one way, The hobos had problems, but we had problems too. I was born in 1932, and that was Roosevelt closed the banks in 1932. And my mother was pregnant with me in February of 1932, and my father was scared to death. Oh God, I've got to have a job. Well, he got a job working for an oil company as a truck driver, and he had this great, humongous yellow truck, and you had to go up steps to the top and so forth. There was no power machinery there. If he were to take his hose up to a house on a hill, he pulled it by hand up the hill and so on. I loved that truck. I loved it. And occasionally he took me to school, and all the guys said, "Wow, this is terrific." But my father was a truck driver, and very glad to do so. Now, during that time, he was a truck driver, but you say, well, a laborer. Okay, fine. But suddenly, at the beginning of the war, they said, wait a minute, truck drivers are essential. And because he was essential, it meant that he got a great gas ration, little tape on his car and everything. And he didn't have to go to war. So he was let's see, my father was born in 1906, and we're talking about 1940. They could have drafted him, but they never did, because he was essential.
So all these historic moments in history, from the Great Depression to World War II. You've recorded a lot of these moments that have in your paintings of DC. Do you see your artwork as a part of history?
Uh, that's an interesting question. Actually, it's a part of my history, but I don't consider it a part of the history. When I do historical things, it has to do with a much earlier era, and I've done my ancestors and people that of that era. But mostly my paintings have to do with my own life.
Right. You put yourself in a lot of your artwork.
Oh, like Alfred Hitchcock,
Right.
some,
Some.
but I didn't do it to be cute.
Well,
I was doing it because I needed a figure and I didn't have anybody around, so I would look in the mirror and there I was.
so you don't see yourself as part of the history of DC?
I would like to. No, I would like for the DC to think of me as part of their history. Well, I'm still waiting, and at 80 years of age, maybe I'm not running out of time, but I'm a little impatient that maybe I might be considered part of Washington history. Why not?
Well, you've done many commissions that have been placed all over the city, and could you tell me a little bit about what your most exciting commission was?
My commissions?
Mm-hmm.
Well. Uh, well, one of the best was for Capital One Bank. And I did a big painting of Harper's Ferry for Capital One Bank. I've never seen it in place, but it's Capital One headquarters is over in Alexandria, Tyson's Corner. But I have not seen the painting in its boardroom or anything. But I like the fact that they own it. And Capital One, as you know, is a big deal these days. And Capital One bought the Chevy Chase bank, and so all of a sudden, I had done commissions for Chevy Chase Bank. All of a sudden, the two are in the same company, you see. I'm happy about those things. They were big commissions and they were large, and they took me a year or so to do, you see. But I just hope that everything will stay put. The problem is with art, you think that when you get a commission like that, it's going to go to a place and it's going to stay there. But that's not true because a new owner will come along and then they'll say, well, we don't want these things anymore. And that hurts me to the quick to think that my paintings can be removed from the walls after, 15 or 20 years. That I don't like, but that's all right. I have those two big paintings and they're still in their place, and I'm glad of that.
Well, that's great. And when you documented these images, did you know that they wouldn't be there forever, or that the way they appear wouldn't?
I certainly never thought that what goes up can also go down.
Mm-hmm.
I never, until recently, when I see that things change, and not necessarily for the better, but I hope that the remaining commissions that I have around will stay in their place. I hope so.
Are there any images from your memory that you would like to bring to canvas?
What?
Are there any images from your memory that you would like to bring to canvas, that you would like to paint of the city?
Well, for a while I was doing paintings that had to do with the Civil War, because John Wilkes Booth and Davy Harold escaped from Ford's Theater 1 block away from me. And they went right by the building that was in the same site where my studio is now, right by my windows. And then they raced on down to the Capitol grounds and then went across what we used to call the 11th Street Bridge and then down into southern Maryland. And Mary Surratt's boarding house, is only 1 block from my old studio. It's now in Chinatown. But I don't think most people that see it even realize that Mary Surratt was there and that a lot of the plotting was there. And right adjacent to my studio was a building called Herndon House, and it's still there, which was a part of the plot.
Well, speaking of your old studio, you watched the 1968 riots. in D.C. after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh.
from your art studio window in downtown D.C.
Absolutely.
What was that like?
Well, I had this real old glass in my windows, but somehow I thought it was like looking on TV. I never dreamed that somebody could smash it with a brick or anything. Why would they do that? So I just watched the riots from my window. My friend Bill Woodward, who taught at George Washington University for 32 years or so, we were sitting at that table right there. That's my grandmother's kitchen table. And looking out this window, we could see to the left at 14th Street, smoke coming up. Then we could see over to 7th Street, which is around the corner, smoke coming up there. And then if you looked over to the far right, you could see smoke coming up from 8th Street. But we were sort of entertained by this because, first of all, Nixon said, look, don't touch those people. They would come out with TV sets and they'd be laughing and everything, and they'd be right in front of my window, and the police would circle them on their motorcycles, but they didn't touch them. Now, the problem there is that if there are merchants in a place, they have to be guaranteed police protection or they can't stay there. They can't have that insurance. And in this case, the whole neighborhood stopped short in its development after that time because nobody could have any insurance. But I watched it. Yes, I watched it going up, big black smoke, you see. And then 2 or 3 days, we had curfews at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, which meant that we had to go home, and there were National Guard soldiers on all of the street corners. And then, so I'd go home, and people be mowing their lawns and it was just quiet and so on. But downtown was scary. Now, 3 days after that all this happened, I said, well, I'm going to kind of mosey over to 14th Street and see if I can see what is happening. Well, little did I realize this was still going on. And suddenly there was a car behind me and a car in front of me and people just outrageously running. I said, oh my goodness, what is going to happen now? So, and then there was tear gas in the streets and so on, and cars overturned. And that was kind of scary. But when I was in my studio looking at it, I said, my goodness, this is an interesting situation.
Did you ever find yourself feel that you were a target as a white man during that time?
I feel that I was.
Was it target during that time as a white man downtown DC?
Well, when I was going up 14th Street, I happened to be there, and to be a target just happens sometimes to be in a place where things are going on. It doesn't have to be that they're after you, but whoever is there, that was scary, yeah.
Was there ever a point during that time where you thought about leaving your studio in downtown DC behind and heading out of the city?
Well, you want to know something? I would not have been in my studio as long as I was if there hadn't been that stopping short of development down there. So it meant, let's see, that I was there altogether for 32 years. I didn't leave my studio until 1996. I came in '64, you see. And then that was because there was starting to be redevelopment. My building was considered preserved. The whole building was, not just the facade, but the whole building. And but then, there was awful kinds of people that are coming into our doorway and urinating on the floor, that kind of stuff. Well, that wasn't so nice. And guess who was there? At that time, next door to me was Clarice Smith, who gave the art building and gave this gym across the street from us. And she was there. And my goodness, her family was furious because, they're wealthy people. And so I had to walk her up to the parking lot, you see. But she was there, and her mother had a fit, and Bob Smith, who is the person that gave so much money here, he was furious. But she's a headstrong woman. She says, "I'm not going to be driven out by these people."
Mm.
Isn't that funny? Isn't that strange?
It is strange. So how have instances in history like these shaped you as an artist and shaped your artwork?
Well, first of all, one of the ones that influenced me the most was that I graduated from high school in 1950. And that was a week and a half after I graduated. The Korean War began. But we were all really sensing that something was going to happen. And so a lot of the guys said, "Get into the National Guard. If you're in the National Guard, they won't, they just protect you in this country." Harry Truman said, "This is a police action." Therefore, he drafted all of the National Guard. But as often I have luck in my life, I happen to have what was known, because I had a scholarship, a 2S rating, which meant that I could stay in school until I graduated. Now, you know, when I think back, that is so unfair. Mm-hmm. You know, all these poor people who weren't really in school were sent over to Korea very prematurely, because they went to Camp Jackson, South Carolina, and then off they went. And a number of guys that I had just graduated with in 1950 went over there and were killed. Then the other thing was they had something called ROTC at Maryland University, which meant that if you went into engineering, you could go into the ROTC, and then you'd come out as second lieutenant in the Army, you see. And some of the guys did that. But they were vulnerable too, you see. But I was protected for the whole war. And later on, I felt really guilty about that. I really did. I said, "No, wait, this isn't fair. This isn't fair at all." But that's the way it was at that time.
And so you actually did have an instance where you were drafted later on in your life.
Oh, God.
And you had an experience almost going into the military service. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
This is a very embarrassing thing to think about. But I graduated in 1954, and the war was over by that time. So they looked around and said, "Well, wait a minute, what about these guys, you know, that got a free ride this whole time? We're going to get those guys." And so I knew this, and so I said, "Well, you know, my time has come. I'm going to have to go in the service," and so forth. And I was drafted in. But we went out over to Alexandria, Virginia, and my father put my car up on bricks, you know, and he said, "Goodbye, son." And I had a little bag with me and so on. But I happened to ask at the last minute after the visit, I said, "Look, I want to tell you something. I am allergic to adhesive tape and wool, and I have some scars from adhesive tape right on my chest." And he looked at him, and then he took this big loose leaf notebook with the rings like that, and he went through this thing, and he said, "Well, Mr. Wright, I'm afraid you're going to have to give up the idea of the Army altogether." What? What? That's what he said. So all these guys went one direction, and I went back the other direction. And they were happening to have a streetcar strike at the time, and I stood at the stop, forgetting about the streetcar, for an hour, and then I walked home because my house wasn't far from there, and then I went out to my girlfriend's house after I got home, and in the door, the panels of the door, I saw my wife's grandmother. And she saw me, and she was so shocked. And I said, "No, I'm back, I'm back." And she was so upset. She opened the door. She said, "Frank, the Army would have done you good." And she burst into tears and ran up the stairs.
Wow.
Well, you know, we were really friends later on, but she had had enough of me because I usurped her time there. And when I would go over to my girlfriend's house, they would all cater to me and chocolate cake and all that kind of stuff. And she was sort of backseated, you know, when I was there. But she was nice, except for that. I laughed. I thought that was hilarious. I felt like somebody in a Saul Bellow novel or something. I'm back? No, I'm back.
So going back to your artwork, do you think there's something people can learn about history that they can't learn from a textbook through artwork?
Well, a picture's worth 1,000 words, isn't it? Well, in all fairness, maybe mine is worth a couple hundred words, don't you think?
I would say so.
I guess if I were trying to educate people with my pictures, I guess that would be the case. Because, you know, there are a lot of artists in history who deliberately were trying to tell you something from their images, Hogarth and all kinds of people like that. And yes, you could learn a lot. And I would put various instances and people in the painting that would tell some story, especially about the Civil War or whatever. Yeah.
So would you say you love history? Yes or no?
Would I say so? I would be foolish to say I don't.
And how come? What do you love about
Well,
history?
you know, I would go up to New England every summer to visit my wife's family, and I would go into every junk shop along the way, and I would look for objects and so on, especially for photography, early photography. So I have a major collection of early photography. I have 400 daguerreotypes, which were the earliest images known, 1839, 1840. And I have all of these, but I never collected them for money. What I wanted was to learn. And so I would ask the lady in the front desk who was watching a little TV set with As the World Turns on it, you know. And I said, do you have any case images? And you don't say daguerreotypes. That means you know what you're talking about. You mean those little instant ancestors? Ha, ha, ha. Says, well, we used to take them out of the case and use the cases for cigarettes, you know. I said, well, do you happen to have any around? And then she would say, well, now let me see. And she'd have a thing of keys that looked like a jailer. And she would go to some case in the back of the room and open it. And as she did, she would knock everything down to get to the daguerreotypes. And is this what you want? And I said, how much is it? And says, it's $5. Oh, could it be a little cheaper? You know, that's the way it started. And then the images were $10, $15, and so on. But I said, no, I'm not selling anything, because if I do, then I'm suddenly in the business. I did not want to be in the business. Well, you know, out of 400 images, some of them, like original Matthew Brady daguerreotypes, are worth a lot more. But I don't have any record whatsoever of selling any, and I haven't. And I hope will go on to another generation. So that's how I collect. But I collected to learn. And I also collected documents and things to learn, like the black border editions of the death of Lincoln in 1865. I have all sorts. In fact, in this very room I have them, you know. But that was just, it was always to learn. It was never to sell, because I'm not a merchant. Not now and not ever.
You're not a merchant, you're an artist. And a historian.
Well, once upon a time I was.
Time.
I don't know what the future holds, because I've got a lot of paintings that are unsold.
Well, we've been through a large portion of your life today. We've talked about the Great Depression, we've talked about World War II, and you know, after experiencing all of these memorable moments, would you say if you had to paint a single image that summed up your life, do you know what it would be of?
Well, you got to realize how many paintings and things I've done. I've done self-portraits to be self-portraits. What I want to do is this generation of my family my granddaughter,
Mm.
who's over there on the wall, you see. And I'd like to do some paintings of her. When I did paintings of my daughter, she was at home, you see, and she was around. My granddaughter lives a little further away. And then photography has improved so vastly because of the computer that I don't know if my paintings could compete with that, you know. But that is something I would like to do. And it's fun when she comes over, you see. And then I even say, Adriana, how would you, I have an idea. Why don't you come and live with us and go over to your parents on weekends? And she says, that is not an option. But I see her often. She's just 15 minutes away, around where the Mormon temple is.
Mm-hmm.
She's right there. So I see her often, especially when her parents want to go out. They just dump her on us and so on. And she likes our house, you know.
Do you think she'll be a future young artist?
She wants to be an actress.
Oh, an actress.
And I mean, she's really serious about it. Now, she's not the type of person who is going to do something that you want. She wants to do it because she wants it. Well, we've taken her to a lot of theater, the Arena Stage, and the Kennedy Centers with her little girlfriends and so on. And in fact, they had Oklahoma at the Arena Stage. And she liked the person that played Aunt Eller so much, she wrote her a letter.
Oh, wow.
And real nice letter, and really nice. And then Aunt Eller wrote back to her. Isn't that wonderful? This lovely letter, you see. So she wants to be an actress, and she's with Imagination Theater, which is out in Bethesda, and she loves it. And she was in Bye Bye Birdie, and so on. And when she's on, she is the character. She's not Adriana anymore. She gets the character just right.
That's
And
great.
I'm amazed by that. But I think she better think about other things before she starts being an actress.
Well, speaking of young actresses or artists, do you think there's a role for them in the future to serve as visual scribes of history? Do you think that art will always be a part of recording history? What would you say to the young artists today?
Well, the problem is, to be a professional artist, you also but you still need to earn a living. And the poor kids today that do want to be artists have this to face. Well, since I was conservative, I would talk to their parents. They say, well, Johnny really wants to be an artist, but how is he going to earn his living? And then, of course, there are things like visual communication and so on. And they like parents like that kind of an argument, you know. And but now, though, my problem is that having a studio and everything is very costly, and I haven't sold anything or had a commission for several years. Then the Internal Revenue will say, well, wait a minute, if you haven't had any income in several years, then you can't take anything off for your expenses. And that is the situation I'm in now, because there's this bête noire where then you'll be audited. Now, the last thing in the world I want to do is audited. But my studio has been away from my home, and that has been a great thing. People who have studios in their home are asking for trouble. But I always had a studio away from my home. But if you know anybody who wants to buy a painting, you know, real cheap, here I am.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today, Frank. Is there anything else I should have asked you that I haven't?
No, well, only one thing,
Yeah.
and that is when I went to Europe for the first time, I was on another scholarship, and it was a scary time because it was what was known as the Suez Crisis, when Gamal Abdel Nasser took over the C&O Canal and sealed it away from Western Europe. So poor Western Europe had no heat, no heat, because he had privatized the Suez Canal. Now that happened, And the same time was what was known as the Hungarian Revolution. The Hungarian Revolution meant that the Russians came into Budapest and took it over. And there were people fleeing from Budapest all over Europe. And those two things happened at the same time. Well, here I wasn't, and the Americans were a little scared about going to Europe. So I was, you know, in November of 1956. Oh, and then they had big parades on in Paris on the Champs-Élysées, and I went down to the Arch of Triumph and looked at all the flowers and things there, and I'd read the notices, and as I was doing it, I stepped onto the tomb of the unknown soldier. I didn't put out the light, but I just had my hands behind my back, and suddenly the two policemen lifted me vertically into the air off of that tomb, you know. But I didn't do any harm, and I didn't put out the light. That would have been big news, you see. But that was a strange time in Europe, and a lot of those Hungarian people who fled never went back to Hungary. They were scattered all over Western Europe. They were stateless. But that's when I arrived in Florence. And there was a student there at the time, whom you probably have heard of, who wanted to be an artist. And his name was Robert Redford. Mm-hmm. You ever heard of Robert Redford? Oh, Sundance Kid and all of that. Well, you haven't heard of Robert Redford? He would be hurt. But he was going to be an artist then. And then he became a movie star. Yeah. But that was fun. My wife and I were married in Florence the next year.
Oh, wonderful.
And then we stayed an extra year after that. So we had a great time there. So I was in Florence for 2 years. Then later I was in Paris for 3 years. And that's been my life. Luck in one thing at a time.
Well, it's truly a fascinating story.
One other thing. In 1941, my father says there's going to be a war coming and everything, so he ordered a new car in March of 1941. And by August of 1941, they froze cars, the production of cars for civilians for the remainder of the war until 1945. And here we had this brand new deluxe Chevrolet, Master Deluxe Chevrolet, and everybody would have offered him thousands of dollars to have this new car because they were running around in junk, you know. So we had a new car in the war, but my father wouldn't drive it. You know, he only drove it on Sunday. He would walk to work down the railroad tracks, but there was the car sitting in front of the house. Wow. Isn't that funny?
It is funny. It's a great story. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today. Really, truly learned a lot about history.
I wonder, you've learned a lot of odd information, mainly about me, but history has to take care of itself. I don't know what. Now, I hope that sometime, we'll go around from the dark side of the moon, and all of a sudden people will say, hey, you know, we like art again, you know? And there I am, or what remains of me.
I guess we'll see.
We will see, or somebody will. I don't know if it's me.
Well, thank you.
You're quite welcome.